Be here now. Just be here now.
Hello, my name is Ram Dass, and I'm here at the Findhorn Foundation. On one level, I'm just floating through Europe, speaking here and there to listen, to get a pulse and feeling for what's happening throughout this part of the world. It's a very interesting, exciting period of change and opening, and it's interesting to hear how everybody's doing that. Also, I come here to honor one of the older institutions within the something that started in the 60s and is still going on, a kind of shift in consciousness and an attempt, this being an extraordinary experiment in attempting to create a community around transformation of consciousness that's responsive to the existing conditions and doesn't just impose one from another culture or another time. So that's what I'm here doing. And I'm earning my living. I'm doing all of this. How all this fits in with my life is my dharma, or my way to God, is through service. My name is Ram Dass, meaning servant of God. And I don't know how I serve. I listen to hear, and obviously I have something. I am able to be a mouth for a process, so that when I talk with people, it's not like I feel I know the answers. It's much more that I feel that I am a mouth that expresses beautifully what is a collective consciousness that we're all experiencing. And so that's how I serve in some part. I do a lot of other things too, but that's one thing.
Well, as I recall, you've always been one of the real pioneers of recent Western culture, often coming to it, I feel, from the vantage point almost of the radical critic. I mean, you were once ensconced at Harvard University, where, as a professor of psychology, you, together with Tim Leary, discovered LSD and got into it and its full potential. In like manner, you were one of the first people to go to the East and to bring back that vast reservoir of spiritual riches to an appreciative and needy Western culture that was perhaps seeking a more profound sense of its own identity and purpose. And you've been around for a long time. So I'd just be curious to know where you see yourself as having come to on that journey, and what sense of purpose, if any, is moving you at the moment.
Well, as you describe that particular historical sequence, one of the things it's brought me to is less and less identification with that, with being a historical entity, with being a being carrying a sense of history with me. So that the richness of this moment is what it is. It's the rain and you and me and this moment and the camera and the people that are going to see it, and this is what's real. And my history and your history are all part of the mush of it all, but where I don't carry that identity. I don't identify with that sequence very much unless you present it to me, and then I listen to hear who I must be. And in that sense, I don't really have much of a sense of who I am, and I'm not disturbed by not having it. In fact, I'm kind of delighted to not know who I am and not know what this is about. I'm getting to enjoy the mystery much more than I used to, when I felt I had to be somebody all the time going somewhere. So I feel that the fact that I am not busy trying to go somewhere is a statement about where I am on that path, which is an interesting way of feeling it, that I'm relaxing into being what I am a lot. And that's what's happened to me over 20, 30 years. It's now nearly it is 30 years since I consciously started this journey.
What did the start of the journey look like for you?
It was an experience with mushrooms with Tim Leary. And it made me realize that I wasn't who I thought I was. And I, in a way, feel that for 30 years I have been dealing with the integration of the planes of awareness with each other, or growing into what happened to me that first moment. I mean, I think one moment can take 30 years easily to digest. And I think we're so busy taking an experience and then saying, oh, I digested it, now I'll go on, I want more experience. So I really see now as getting high as, I mean, going out there, going up or whatever, as pleasant, but not terribly relevant to me at the moment. I mean, I feel that more and more I'm finding there here and finding the emptiness in the form, finding the awe in the nothing specialness, finding the, I mean, I'm just learning that whole process. So I don't have any idea whether I'm about to get enlightened or I have about 2 million more births, and I don't really care, because what am I going to do? I'm doing what I can do. There's no way to stop the process, and there really isn't much of a way to speed it up either.
What is your understanding of what enlightenment would entail?
Well, having been around my guru, I sure as hell know it isn't what I am. I experience what it's like to be nowhere and be everywhere at the same moment. I experience what free awareness is. Free awareness is not, as I say, when I let go of the identification with the storyline, that's one of the processes of becoming free. To be able to have it, I have that storyline, but it's just another dimension. It's not, I'm not busy carrying it. And to not be busy being high or busy being low or busy being on the path or busy, it's the issue of identification with thought. And as I move more and more into the quality of the kind of boundaryless liquid love, and that comes into balance with the precision of discriminating wisdom, there is a quality of light, delight, kind of emptiness of form and illusion and reality. Like Kalu Rinpoche saying, you must understand you live in illusion, but there is a reality, and you are that reality. When you realize this, you see that you are nothing, and being nothing, you are everything. That's all there is to it.
Is it your sense that your guru is one who is both nowhere and everywhere at the same time?
Yes.
So you're effectively following his example?
Yes.
As I'm sure you're aware, there's a lot of talk about what enlightenment might mean. It's a word that comes to us largely from the East. Is what you just said about it the extent of what you can say? I mean, some people, for example, suggest that enlightenment is about waking up to the way in which we're all part of a much bigger thing, a much bigger process, in relation to which we all have an integral role to play. Is that what you mean?
That's awakening. That's not enlightenment. Awakening to it, as you pointed out. That's the beginning of it. But then, after you awaken, which is what happened to me 30 years ago, then comes the rest of the path, which is integrating it all, so that you're, first of all, you go into it, and then you go back into, oh, we're all interrelated. Oh, it's all one. Oh, it's empty. Oh. And you go beyond experience for a moment. I mean, the first nibbanic experience is like this millisecond. It has no time, so it feels eternal, but it's like that. And then you stabilize it all, and you get to the point where it's all present all at once. Then you're getting closer to the issue of enlightenment. So I think it is moving out of time. It's living in love. I mean, these are all metaphors. It's living with the nature of the formless nature of truth. it's living with emptiness, with equanimity, with things, not things as the polar opposite of something else, but as something which embraces polarity.
So what moves you then? I mean, what brought you to Europe? Is it simply a function of making a living? Do you not experience a moving purpose?
No. No, I don't think I do. I think I'm just watching forces activate. Like when I'm broke, then I have to work for money. Now, so a lot of my lectures I give because I have to earn a living. If I didn't have to earn a living, I probably wouldn't give the lectures. In the process of giving the lectures, I grow, other people grow, Dharma is transmitted. But to say I'm doing it to transmit Dharma, that's partly true, but partly not true. I mean, I think there's all these levels, and I'm just kind of watching the unfolding of what Ram Dass' storyline is. I'm not really attached to now whether I'm an anachronism from the 60s, or I'm about to happen, or my television career is just about to be launched, or that's not an appropriate medium for me, or I've written the last of my books, or I'm about to write great books, or I'm going to stay on the road, or I'm about to stop. I mean, this is all true and stuff to play with, but it's not where I'm living. It's the stuff of the game. So I don't really have much mythic identity. I'm not part of something big or important or significant, or I'm not, it's not Ram Dass. It's the idea of crossing the sand and leaving no footprints is not unappealing to me. Put it that way.
Listening to you as I have for the past several days, I rather have the feeling that one of the things that you speak about with just a little bit more passion, perhaps, is the ecological situation in which we as a species find ourselves on this planet. What is it that concerns you in that regard, and what do you see as being an appropriate response?
I think it's interesting that the fact that I work with dying of individuals so much, the transfer value of all we learn about individual dying and how to stay conscious in the presence of that is very relevant to the way in which we engage in the potential of life on Earth dying, and how we remain equanimous within that, so that I feel like I have a body of wisdom or intuitive wisdom that I've evolved over 30 years of working with dying that is transferable and useful to the culture at this moment. Because as it dawns on people more and more the implications of our ecological predicament, there can be increasing panic and chaos in social systems. Because just as Elizabeth Ross points out, that when you realize you're going to die, you deny, then you bargain, then you get angry. So the denial, which is the first stage we're in, then comes the bargaining. If I separate cans and bottles, can the world go on? How much do I have to give up of what I got to go on? And then there's the anger when you realize you can't, it's all done. I mean, there's nothing you can do about it. And that's the one that's interesting in terms of what happens to social systems under those conditions, if that's a collective response. I mean, it's interesting that whether what part Chernobyl played in bringing down the whole communist system. I mean, I think it was a key factor in that whole process.
What is the connection there?
I think that a trauma to a society of that size and the fallout from that in terms of the immense amount of suffering that is going to cause and has caused that is not being acknowledged by everybody, and the social system is trying to contain it, makes the disparity between a political system and a kind of ethical and intuitively compassionate view of the world, that disparity, evident, and it provokes something in people. That they say, I am supporting or part of an institution that it doesn't represent the compassion of my heart. Now what happens? Or it isn't realistically dealing, like my society isn't realistically dealing with the issue of nuclear waste. And yet I'm part of that society. So how does that disparity affect my behavior in relation to the political situation? And it does affect it. So that's the kind of link.
You mean it's undermining our faith in the system's capacity to accommodate itself to that kind of reality?
Just in the same way as the economic breakdowns in the system have done that. Now, those are also precipitating factors.
So you feel the environmental crisis is bigger than the institutions that are there to deal with it?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, because the institutions all have a vested interest in maintaining themselves in the face of change. And the question is how adaptive they are to change. And if they get too frightened, they get very violent, and then they start to blame each other, and it's creating a potentially very chaotic situation.
So what kind of advice or suggestions would you make to people who are heading these institutions and governments, and who are no doubt trying to respond to them, without, of course, changing too much?
Yeah, well, I mean, you can't say it to them. I can't say to George Bush, work on yourself, because he doesn't know what the hell I'm talking about. He's trying to be good. I think he's really trying to be good. I don't think he's a bad man. He does bad things, but that's not as part of his worldview of what goodness is. But I can just say to him that this is a challenge. His role is a challenge that demands he listen to his really intuitive heart as deeply as he possibly can. And I encourage him to continue to do that. And to not get so lost in the role he's in that he doesn't listen anymore. And that a more reflective demeanor would be a more effective role player. And then to understand what leadership is, for example, in the history of my form of government, my country, comes mainly out of the Masonic order, the Masons. 57 of the 65 framers of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, things like that, were all Freemasons. And in Freemasonry, and the dollar bill, for example, which has a pyramid with a break in the center of it, reflects the issue of the upper planes and the earth plane and the spiritual plane. And in the definition in Freemasonry, the leaders of a society are the ones empowered to be the link between the higher planes and the earth plane. As materialism gets more pervasive, endemic, whatever you want to call it, the leader redefines the role as primarily somebody to contain and hold the power to keep the system going, and loses that humility. Like my guru said, Lincoln was a good president because he knew Christ was president. He was only acting president. See, and I don't know that George Bush just thinks he's acting president. I think it's very hard to deal with that much power without getting lost into the role. And when you say our country lives under God, or I mean, whatever that means, has to be acknowledged and honored.
So you're suggesting that the macro-level global crisis can really only be responded to properly by going deeper into oneself?
In consciousness. I think that President Havel, when he addressed our Congress in the United States, and he said the situation requires a new level of consciousness. And I think that's the same thing that the Dalai Lama says. It's the same thing that Gorbachev has said in his highest moments. I think that there are wisdom holders within the political spectrum. They're not pure wisdom holders. I think the Dalai Lama is perhaps the purest of them because his tradition focuses so much inwardly. But I think there are some world leaders that are at least hearing the need for that deeper level of consciousness. And I think as we honor them for what they are, we will open the political arena to assessing people along those dimensions as well as in terms of their political acumen. Yeah, that's interesting.
Do you think it's relevant that the Dalai Lama is actually not in a position of temporal power at the moment? That in some respects, spiritual purity can only be maintained when you're not in that kind of position?
No. I think that he could retain, knowing him as I do, I think he would retain it whether he was in or out of power. In fact, he's got power over, there are several million people he has power over at the moment. And I think he's politically very active, and I think he's quite present in the midst of it.
Okay, point taken. I think you're probably right about the Dalai Lama. But do you feel that there's any intrinsic inconsistency about being in power and listening to that deeper intuitive part of yourself?
I think the more symbolic power you have, whether it's money or beauty or political power, I think the more there is a unified projection upon you of your identification with that symbolic value. And the more that is unified, that conspiracy of seeing you as an identity with that symbolic power, the harder is it for you to maintain a part of you that has nothing to do with that. And I think what you can offer somebody that has a lot of symbolic power is the work you do on yourself to not get sucked in by the symbolic power. Whether their symbolism is, like I work with a fellow who is a quadriplegic, and he can only speak by and his hand is held over an alphabet board, and he can spell out one letter by letter words. And he's had that happen when he was 11 years old, and he's now 28 or 9. And when I first met him, there's a lot of symbolic value in that, and how dependent he is for everything he does on other human beings. And my feeling of it took me maybe 6 months of being with him until he and I were just present together, and he has his journey and I have mine. And as my work gets clearer, he gets freer, because then my consciousness can really help him. And my job, if I were invited to be with, say, George Bush, is how caught will I be in George Bushness, and how much can I meet a fellow being? And I don't know my price until I get into the situation. Part of why I work in fundraising and seva is because dealing with very wealthy people who have a lot of symbolic power, because when you're fundraising and you meet a rich person, it's hard not to get caught in their rich personness. And every time you do, you reinforce their entrapment in their rich personness, because everybody else is caught in it around them, because everybody wants something from it. And so the art of being able to ask for money and not getting lost in it is a very interesting exercise, spiritual exercise on oneself.
What is the Seva Foundation?
Seva is a Sanskrit word which means to serve, and it's a group of us that came together in 1979 and have been augmented since, of people who wish to relieve suffering and do it together, collaborate to help relieve suffering in the world, and in the process for us to grow spiritually. And over 12 years, We've undertaken projects around alleviating preventable and curable blindness in Nepal, India, and now through an institute into all developing countries. We've worked in Central America with a lot of the violence and hardship in the culture. Work with Native Americans, we work with homeless. We work wherever our heart leads us. And so there's fundraising, and there's program development, and relations among all of us. And we're a hands-on board. That is, we all are involved in all of it. I mean, no, we're not all involved in all of it, but the board is actively involved. I'm, for example, involved now in a project in Madurai, India, where I'm working in the system to create something. So then I come back and I fundraise, and so I have all these different parts to play.
Be here now. Just be here now.